All right, we're going to be teaching you imaginary unit, which is 5-4 in the notes. This unit is about the imaginary number, but it's described by the letter I, and it's typically in script. And I stands for the square root of -1. Now to get I to be an actual number, you have to do I squared to get -1 out of the radical. So multiplying and adding and subtracting I is different than with other regular numbers. So for the first example, we're going to show you how to do it with absolute value. Now, the formula that you're going to use is it's going to be in the form of the absolute value of A plus BI. So what you're going to want to do then is you're going to want to take these out, A and B out, and put them into a radical in the form of A squared plus B squared to get the answer. So let's go on to number 1. For our first example, we have 3 plus 7i. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the same formula of a squared plus b squared, and we're going to plug in 3 and 7. So 3 is a, so it's 3 squared plus 7 squared. This is then 9 plus 49, which then gives you the square root of 58, which is your final answer.
Now let's move on to example 2. As you saw in the last answer, the square root of 58, that wasn't perfect. It was still in the radical because it couldn't be simplified. Now let's find one that can. Let's say the example is the radical 4 in absolute value 4 plus 6i, and then we are going to, just like the other one, use the equation of a plus bi. No? Now that may have been wrong. Don't do that on the quiz. A squared plus b squared. I feel like we should start over.
So then you're going to take 4 and plug it in. So it's 4 squared plus 6 squared. Then you square them both, and you get 16 plus 36, which is then the square root of 52, which can be simplified.
So what you're going to do to simplify this can be simplified by dividing it by 2, but that's not the largest number that can go into it. If you divide it by 2, you get 2 and 26. 26 can go further, so you ask, what's a bigger number that can go into it? 3 cannot, 4 can. So let's say 4 goes into 52 13 times. These are both in the radical. 13 cannot be simplified, but 4 can. You can take it out of the radical by squaring it, and you get 2, because that's 2 times 2. Now that it's out of the radical, you take 2 and put it in front of the 13.
And that's your answer. Now you want to look with every problem that's with absolute value to see how simplified you can get it. You want to try to get it as simplified as possible.
Now let's move on to addition. Let's start with an example. Let's say 25i plus 5i minus 53. Now this is a pretty simple equation. What you're going to do is you're going to combine like terms, which is going to end up being 30i, and then you bring down the one that isn't alike. So that's 30i minus 53. And now you're going to want to still think about the a squared plus b squared format. Or in this case, you're going to, basically you're going to have to put the 30i, because it's an I, at the end. So you're just going to switch it around until it's negative 53 plus 30i. And that's your answer.
Now, for more clarity on this, let's try another example. So our second example is going to be 3i over 4 plus 4i over 8. Now you might be thinking that this looks extremely difficult, but it's not. With all fractions, we always start with simplifying. So first you're going to take out a 2 out of both, which then gives you a 2 and a 4, which then can be simplified even more, but you want the denominators to be equal. Therefore, you leave it as 2/4. So then you're going to rewrite it. 3 over 4i plus 2 over 4, with I in the numerator. This is important for later, as we will go into more detail about I when it's in the denominator. Now to do this again, you just add like terms. So it's 5i, and you keep the denominator the same, over 4. Now this is your final answer. You can do nothing more with it. This is an improper fraction, however. So you can, if you would like, turn it into a proper fraction of 1 1/4 I. They're the same answers, but simply different forms.
Now let's take a look at subtraction. Now subtraction isn't very different from addition, but there is one important step that you have to keep in mind. Let's start out with a simple expression to sort of get us started. Let's say 6i plus 1 minus 4i. Now you can see that this is a subtraction problem because it's got a subtraction letter in it. But just like addition, you are going to combine like terms, even though it's a negative. And 6i combined with negative 4i is 2i plus 1. And like we said before, the I has to be at the end, so this is 1 plus 2I.
Now, this example was pretty simple. And it was simply combining like terms. However, our second example is going to go into more detail about that one thing which you always have to keep in mind when subtracting. So we're going to have two binomials, each with I. Now, it's not as complicated as it seems, but you have to remember that there's a subtraction sign, and you need to distribute it to both numbers. So our first binomial is going to stay the same, and then it's simply going to be a -4. However, a negative and a negative creates a positive 2I. After this, it's pretty simple, and you simply combine like terms once again. So 7 minus 4 is 3, and 8I plus 2I is 10I. And this is your final answer. Next, we're going to move on to multiplication. And it's pretty similar to addition, but it's a little bit different, especially with I as they have exponents. So first example is going to be pretty easy. It's 6I times 5I. So it seems pretty simple. You just multiply like constants, 6 and 5, to get 30. However, then you have an I off the back of them. And it's obviously going to be an I squared because each I has an exponent of 1. And whenever you multiply, the exponents must be added together. So your answer is 30I squared.
Now let's move on to our second example, which is going to be still multiplication, and it's going to be with binomials. Now let's say both binomials are going to have i's in them. So 10 plus 12i times 6 minus 3i. Now remember, you don't have to have a sign in between them because parentheses imply multiplication. Now with this, you are going to have to FOIL. You can't just go multiplying willy-nilly. So the first idea is multiply first inner. You get the idea. So this is going to end up being 60 minus 30i plus 72i minus 36i squared, because you're multiplying I together. Whoops, there we go. Now you combine these two like terms to get 60 minus 42i minus 36i squared. And if you look, there's an I squared here. So it may look like there's nothing more you can do with it, but you have to rewrite it as multiplying by -1, because I squared equals -1. So this means that you change the sign of 36, but let's write this over. 60 minus 42i, and now since they're two negatives make a positive, that's plus 36. And you have like terms again, so you combine them to get 96 minus 42i. Now that is your answer. You can't do anything more with it.